Welcome to Sleeplis Whispers, where fear meets insomnia. These are true horror stories, told for the sleepless souls who can't close their eyes. Every word you're about to hear, I swear to God, it's true. Tonight's story: the motel that never closed. Eddie took the night clerk job at the Lantern Way because rent was late and the bus didn't run past midnight. The place sits on a hard bend of two-lane where towns thin out. A neon sign that buzzes like an insect in a parking lot that holds snow in pockets. People called it abandoned when the highway crews painted the new bypass. But Gloria kept the keys and a cigarette behind her lip and said, "It'll take cash and quiet hands." I needed both. My name's Jonah Vega. I told myself it was temporary, 1 month. Fill the till. Sleep in a bed that didn't belong to someone else. The office smelled like lemon furniture polish, old coffee, and a drawer of lost receipts. The guest book was a chipped Bible of names folded into the margins. Gloria taught me the small rules before she left me to the night. Check the keys, mind the heat register, and if you hear the speaker say a name, answer in the way the motel wants. Say the name back, give a small fact. Keep it exact, she said. They like facts. At first, the building's voice was the kind of weird you can laugh off. The ceiling speaker clicked on at 2:28 a.m. and said in a practiced monotone, "Room 6, left jacket." I walked the carpeted hall like a man performing choreographed humility, and found a denim jacket folded neat on the radiator. A post-it Room 6, denim. No check-in had that name. Gloria shrugged when I brought it down. "Service," she said. People like things returned. The second week, the motel refined its manners. Names moved through vents like a librarian's breath. The ice machine would rattle out a syllable that matched a sticky note at the desk. There was a cadence to it. Name, tiny fact, last seen, an inventory phrase that the building used to keep track. When someone read a name aloud with the requested detail, sometimes the motel returned an object. A ring folded between sheets, a passport tucked between towels, a small charm of jade in a vending slot cup. The returns felt small and practical, like items moving through a well-organized office, not like a supernatural gift. Then Lena didn't leave. She worked nights at the diner and sometimes came in for a free cup during slow shifts. We both tossed coins into the same coffee maker like a small currency cycle. The night she vanished, the wind came low off the marsh and the highway tasted like metal. Her van was still in the lot at dawn. The driver's door cracked, a thermos still warm on the passenger seat. A folded note on the steering wheel read, "Lena, green scarf. Last saw 3:17. The guest book had the same script from the night before. Cameras around the lot showed her walking down the shoulder, the frame wobbling with interference for 4 minutes. When the image cleared, she was gone. No tire marks, no hitchhiker, nothing that made a tidy answer. After Lena, people stopped assuming the motel was only a benevolent catalog. Volunteers came with flashlights and small rituals, reading names into recorders, folding details on index cards. The motel liked the voice work. It responded better when the town did the labor. Name, detail, a tiny sensory anchor. People began trading specifics like currency. She hums blue moon. He chews peppermint gum. And the motel used them like keys, aligning its little motions to the facts given. We learned strict rules. Nothing made up, no jokes. Do not repeat names as a dare. Say name plus detail. Follow up with action if you can. A phone call, a drive, a search. The motel's kindness required reciprocity. Say a name and do nothing and you invited small corrections. A light bulb in the office that refused, a car that wouldn't crank, a stove that turned cold. Those weren't violent. They were the motel's way of being pedantic. Finish sentences or receive consequences that felt more like paperwork than malice. People began to enlist the Blue Lantern as a civic thing. A sister came from miles away with a photograph and a bus ticket. She sat at my counter and read her sibling's name until her voice broke. After 3 nights, a bead was found threaded through an old coat in a donation bin a county over. Another time, a man came asking for his brother's watch. We read the name and the detail, silver face, dent on the rim, and a watch did turn up under a pile of towels in the laundry, honest as a receipt. The motel's returns were methodical. It seemed to prefer returning small proofs that could be held. At its worst, the motel enforced precision. A teenager tried to toy with it, shouting a vulgar nickname into the lobby speaker as a joke. The neon over the sign popped and a ceiling fan fell with a dull thud. The kid left town the next day and people told the story like a warning. A clerk once miswrote a middle initial, and the room that night developed a stubborn leak. The motel preferred exactness. Sloppiness earned inconvenience. There are nights I think the Blue Lantern practices to remember names because remembering is its only job now. The original owner must have been clerical by trade. Someone taught the walls to count. Its patience is astonishing. It keeps trying the same sequence until someone answers. So volunteers taught themselves a cadence that steadied the building like a metronome. We read names out loud, describing a smell or a jacket or a song, and the motel treated those facts as a map. A group of us once drove the stretch of Route 7 at dawn, ledger in a plastic bag. We read names into the wind and walked shoulders with flashlights. At mile marker 19, the guardrail lay twisted, and in the hollow beneath we found a scarf with a blue thread sewn into it, a detail only the sister had mentioned. She cried and wrapped it against her face like the world had given her back a small clasp of proof. Not all closures were tidy. An ex-con who thought rules were for others wrote a name without a detail and left. That night his truck's battery went dead and he discovered every tire slashed. The motel corrected sloppiness with small havoc. Another time a woman read a name the way a dare and later went missing for a day. She returned shaken, insisting she had gone somewhere else for an hour. The motel's corrections weren't monstrous. They were bureaucratic consequences that made the town careful. I began to keep a notebook in the glove box, names and small facts in my hand. It felt like being a clerk for a public ledger. I told people to bring details. We made up a small protocol. Record 3 times, read the name into the recorder, then check the cameras and call family if possible. The sheriff grumbled but brought donuts on his night rounds and listened to entries with an expression that softened with each small successful return. After a year, the motel settled into a rhythm with the town. People who relied on the ledger learned how to do the work. Be exact, follow through, keep a vigil if you need to. The motel stopped being a freak novelty and became a place of patient labor. We still had losses, some chapters never closed, but the ledger helped more than it hurt. The night I left, I read my own name into the ledger like a small promise. Jonah Vega, I said, and then, because the motel required details even of its staff, drives an older van, keeps coffee in a thermos, sings off-key in the shower. Gloria laughed when she came back to take over my shift. She already had a cigarette behind her lip. "You did good keeping the book," she said, like a judge issuing a mild blessing. On the highway now, sometimes headlights blink in patterns that look like names if you let your mind be charitable. And I check my notebook and add a detail because old habits travel. The motel taught me that memory is something you teach. You practice saying a name aloud. You add the fact that gives it shape. And then you do the small civic work to follow it. Otherwise, the building will keep saying the name until someone answers, and the sound grows thin and sharp with repetition. If you ever find a place that asks you to say a name, do it carefully. Say it slow. Add the detail. Do the small thing afterward. The Blue Lantern isn't malevolent. It is meticulous, and it's only doing the job someone taught it to do. The end. Vacancies. Legere didn't expect a roadside place to keep an inventory of people, but the Blue Lantern did, and it kept it better than I kept my own receipts. My name's Mara Jensen. I pick up odd shifts running the night desk at motels when the film crew's schedule is quiet. Cash tips, warm coffee, a bed that doesn't smell like someone else's cigarettes. The Blue Lantern sat off the bypass on a stretch of Route 9, where the neon sign leaned like a tired wrist. Gloria ran the desk like a woman on terms with the universe, blunt, patient, and careful with people's names. The first night I worked the place, someone had left a note in the guest book, "Say name pulls detail." I thought it was a local prank. The guest book was full of handwriting, some looping, some tight. After midnight, the ceiling speaker clicked and a voice, flat as if used to reading lists, said, "Mara Jensen." I froze with my hand on the key rack. "Who is that?" I asked. "Because you answer a building's question the way you answer a person." "Room 15. Left a scarf." "Color marigold," the speaker answered. I walked to the room because you do what you're asked in a small place. On the bed, a thin scarf lay folded, marigold and faintly perfumed. No one had checked in with that name that night. Gloria shrugged when I brought it down. "Place likes things tidy," she said. "Say the name back and add a fact. That's how it returns." After that, the motel practiced quietly. Names floated through vents. Eddie G likes tobacco. June hums old hymns. When someone read a name aloud with a small detail, sometimes something turned up. A lighter slid from under a pillow, a ring tucked behind a clock. Other times it didn't. The blue lantern didn't reward theatrics, precision mattered. A guy once yelled a nickname as a joke and his car wouldn't start that morning. The motel corrected sloppiness in petty, inconvenient ways. We made rules like a church forms doctrine. Read names aloud. Add a detail, color, scent, a song. Pair up if you're going into the lot. Never invent. Volunteers formed a midnight rota. People with thermoses and gentle voices who read names into a cheap recorder. We called it service. Customers called it odd, and then, if they'd stayed, they called it care. Then Johnny disappeared. He ran the bakery on Maple and wrapped sourdough like a liturgy. The night he vanished, there was a wind that made rotors in the ice machine whine. His backpack sat on the office floor when I opened the door at dawn. Gloria found it and put a post-it. Johnny, red beanie, last saw 3:17. The ledger had that line in Gloria's tidy script. We replayed cameras and found him walking toward his van, the frame freezing for 5 minutes of fuzz, then returning with nothing visible changed except a van light dimmed like a breath. After Johnny, the motel's practice hardened from comfort to form. People who used to show up by curiosity came now as if responding to an obligation. Families drove through the night. A sister from 2 towns over sat in the office with an album and muttered names into a recorder. Her voice shook, but she kept the cadence. Name, detail, last seen. The motel answered by returning small, exact things. The bead from a bracelet folded into a napkin, a ticket stub pressed into a phone case. Those recoveries felt like mercy parceled out in sensible envelopes. I learned to be exact. One night, a young guy came in shaking, said he lost his father's watch. We wrote, Tom R., silver watch, engraving home. We read it aloud together, 3 repetitions. The watch was found by the vending machine the next morning, balanced like a coin atop the drip tray. He hugged it like a relic. It felt like we'd performed a small liturgy and it had been rewarded, but the motel also demanded reciprocity. Saying a name without following with action had consequences. A woman who'd read a name as a dare found her windshield smashed at dawn. A man who invented a ghost name lost 2 nights' work when his truck wouldn't start. The motel's corrections were never violent. They were bureaucratic cruelties that taught people to be careful. We established rituals. Every night at 1 a.m. a volunteer read names into the recorder. At 3:17, the hour that fell heavy in our ledger, we added candles in the office window and kept the door unlocked for anyone who might come to look. We drove lonely stretches of road and called names into the night. If you read a name and followed it with a search, things moved. If you read and did nothing, the motel kept practicing and practicing until it found an answer, or wore itself ragged. I started keeping a small notebook in my apron. It had names and tiny facts scribbled in a cramped hand. Gloria taught me to ask for sensory details, smells, colors, songs. The motel seemed to prefer those anchors. People began leaving small offerings. Mint tins, bus tokens, photos. Once a woman left an old program from a community play because her brother used to keep it in his pocket. These small things gave the motel material to work with. The sheriff tried to regulate the practice. He printed a memo. No unauthorized readings. It felt like daylight trying to fit the night. Volunteers kept reading anyway, more quietly, more carefully. The sheriff himself came to a reading once with a thermos and a look like he was testing his own skepticism. He read a name for a neighbor, and that neighbor later found a missing necklace tucked behind the gas grill. The sheriff kept his thermos after that. The Blue Lantern's corrections sometimes targeted sloppiness in the ledger. A clerk once logged a middle initial wrong, and the room where the wrong name was called developed a leak in the ceiling light. No one was hurt. The motel wanted accuracy. We learnt to check and recheck. The motel's insistence on exactness became a small civic virtue. I won't say it's benevolence. The motel is an apparatus that was taught to remember. Someone, sometime, had started a habit and the building learned the pattern. It did not appreciate being treated like a party trick. When people mocked it or left blanks, the building protested by making simple inconveniences. But when people treated its ledger like a professional list and followed through, the building returned small human things. One winter night, after a storm had snapped power along Route 9, Three of us drove the highway with flashlights and the ledger in a plastic bag. We read names aloud as we walked the shoulders. The wind carried the syllables. At mile marker 12, under a guardrail, we found a backpack with a photo clipped to the inside pocket. The man in the photo was smiling like it was a small crime. The sister who claimed it later told us we were angels. I thought we were only people who had learned to follow a ritual. The sister kissed the photo like it was a talisman and left us with a thermos of coffee and a folded thank you note. Gloria pointed to the ledger and said, "See? People do the work." The book felt heavier on my lap after that, as if it had more pages filled with small mercies. I learned to treat it like evidence and a promise both. There's a cost to attention. People who asked for favors without giving details learned that the motel doesn't like sloppiness. Those who came with journals and patience found closure more often. In a town of slow ends, the Blue Lantern taught precision. When I left the night desk for the film schedule to pick up again, Gloria pressed the ledger into my hands. "Keep it tight," she said. "Names and details. No jokes." I drove away with the book in my lap beneath the dashboard light. On long runs, I read names into the cab, voice low and ritualized, and sometimes the radio would crackle and give me a static that sounded like agreement. The motel taught me that memory isn't passive. It needs verbs, say, search, follow. It needs people to do the small, patient work. If you ever see a place that asks you to read a name, do it with care, add a detail. Then do the thing that finishes the sentence. Don't treat it like a dare. The Blue Lantern isn't a trick. It's a ledger that asks for attention, and when you give it, it returns what it can. The end. The empty roomie took the night shift at the Blue Lantern because the owner paid cash and the highway cops didn't like late questions. The place had a tired neon sign that tasted like static and an office that smelled like lemon oil and cigarette ash. Small comforts for people who sleep in a town that forgets easily. My name's Noah Torres. I was supposed to be passing through fixing a delivery van 2 counties over, but the rain turned the road into an argument, and Gloria at the desk insisted I stay. "We don't close here," she said like it was a fact and a mercy both. She gave me a key, a map of the rooms, and a blunt look that meant I shouldn't be clever about the rules. Blue Lantern is the kind of motel that still does things by hand. Keys on hooks, a paper ledger for the guest book, an icebox that coughs. After midnight, the place shifts. The fluorescent down the hall hums with company. The heater gives little sighs, and the vents carry voices that might only be pipes making sense of one another. The first night I heard a name over the ceiling speaker, soft, cataloged, like someone reading off an inventory list. Noah Torres. I almost laughed. It's uncanny when a building knows you, like being outed by a ledger. I answered because there wasn't much else to do. "Room 7, the speaker said. Left a jacket, color olive. I went to room 7 because the motel expected compliance. On the dresser, a jacket lay folded, a post-it with my name pressed under the sleeve. I hadn't left it. Gloria just nodded when I brought it down. "We keep tidy," she said. "If the speaker asks a name, say it back. Add a detail." That became the pattern. The speaker called names like a list. People who filed in for late coffee began leaving small notes by the register, name plus detail, and volunteers started a cautious rota to read them aloud at 1 a.m. It felt like civic housekeeping. Say a name, give a detail, then follow up. Sometimes the motel returned what it held. A necklace turned up in a lamp. A ticket stub was tucked behind a Bible. A child's mitten appeared under a vending machine. Those recoveries were modest and precise, like the motel kept a drawer of mismatched memory and handed items back when someone asked properly. We learned the rules because the motel taught them. Never invent a name. Say the name slow. Add a sensory detail, color, song, smell. The motel preferred specifics. One night, a man who thought he was funny shouted a name like a joke. That morning, his van wouldn't start, and the ice machine dumped a block of frost onto the floor. The motel corrected sloppiness with petty consequences that felt like administrative discipline, not vengeance. Then Lena vanished. She worked the diner down the road. Sometimes she'd swing by for mint coffee on her walk home. Her van lingered in the lot that night, hazard light blinking like a metronome. A post-it on the dash read Lena, green scarf and last saw 3:12. The motel ledger had the same line penciled earlier. The camera by the office captured her walking east on Route 12 and then a smear of frames where the pixels stuttered. When the feed resumed, the pavement was empty. No footprints, no toe, nothing to name an answer with. After Lena, the Blue Lantern's small rituals felt heavier. Volunteers came with flashlights and purpose. Families showed up in the night with photos. The motel's returns became a kind of public service, but one that required labor. You couldn't just read a name and expect the world to tidy itself. You had to follow the thread. Call police, drive a stretch of road, ask a neighbor. The motel's help came clearer when people did the human work after the ritual. Saying names out loud became a town practice. People gathered in folding chairs and read names into a cheap recorder, 3 times with a detail each round. We drove shoulders and checked under guardrails, and sometimes with the right detail, small things turned up. An earring in a culvert, a wallet on a bench. Those moments felt like mercy parceled out in tiny, precise increments. We learned that mistakes had costs. A clerk miswrote a middle initial and the room that night developed a leak. A kid who mocked the ledger found his tires slashed. The motel didn't breed violence. It enforced exactness. The corrections were inconvenient and personal, teaching people to treat the process like work. Gloria kept the ledger in a drawer and let me help on slow nights. People left Post-its and Polaroids. A sister came from 2 counties over and read her brother's name until her voice trembled. The motel answered with small proofs. A bead tucked into a curtain, a lighter balanced in a lamp base. We accepted those as gifts and tried not to think about where they had been kept. The sheriff came around more often after Lena. He'd sit at the counter with his thermos and listen, his uniform catching the light. "You sure this isn't just a pattern, folks?" he asked once. I shrugged. Patterns are how towns keep track of weirdness. He started to bring cameras that recorded cleaner frames and he began coordinating searches. The motel's ledger was still the town's ledger. Say the name, give a detail, then someone had to do the rest. One night a woman showed up with a photograph and a story. Her brother had left in a hurry years ago and she had never stopped hoping. She sat in the office, hands trembling, and read his name. She said he always hummed a line from Moon River when nervous. We wrote it down and read it into the recorder. 2 mornings later, a volunteer found a scrap of paper tucked in a used book at the church sale, with the beginning of that melody scribbled in pen. The sister cried and pressed the scrap to her mouth like a relic. It wasn't the reunion she'd wanted, but it was evidence that the town had remembered enough to answer, if only in fragments. Not every return ended with reunion. Some names the ledger kept repeating for months like a loose tooth. Volunteers took shifts because the motel's persistence required human stamina. People learned to be patient with the way the building worked. It didn't hurry. It practiced the same syllables until someone answered. The motel's corrections were seldom cruel and seldom comforting. They were administrative. A burner that refused to light, a heater that hiccuped, a flicker that lasted as long as a name. They insisted on the right form. When we learned to supply that form, name and detail in action, the motel became a tool rather than a terror. After a few months, I started carrying a small notebook in my pocket with names and short facts scribbled in a cramped hand. Favorite coat, a song lyric, a scar. I read them aloud when I drove late roads. It felt like a liturgy, plain and practical. Saying names wasn't an invocation. It was an instruction. You offered a fact the motel could use, and it used the fact like a key. One night the speaker called my name and did something that reminded me this whole practice was fragile. "Noah Torres," it said, then paused. "You forgot to follow up on Lena." The ledger lived like an obligation that could sway your nights. I had filed her note and promised to drive the stretch at dawn. I had not gone. The guilt hit like a bill. I texted the sheriff and we searched the shoulder before sunrise. We found a small green thread snagged on a guardrail where Lena's scarf might have caught. It wasn't proof enough to close a case, but it was a hinge. Something to hold while people kept turning the book's pages. Eventually, the town learned to move with the motel instead of around it. People donated enough to keep a volunteer rota. The sheriff coordinated searches and the diner handed out thermoses of coffee. The motel's voice didn't stop. Why would it? Some places are built to remember. The Blue Lantern remembered with a broker's patience, parceling attention into recoveries when humans followed through. I quit when the summer schedule at the shop came around. I had to be away for months. Gloria handed me the ledger when I left with a cigarette tucked behind her lip. Names and details, she said. Don't slack. I packed the book into my glove box and drove away. Sometimes on the road I find a tail light blinking a slow pattern and I think of the ledger. I say a name into the night and add a fact about a coat or a song. It doesn't always help. People still vanish and some things never come back. But the motel taught me there is a method to memory. You say a name, you give a detail, then you do the work. If you don't finish the sentence, the place will keep saying it until someone does. The end. If you're still awake, you've just survived another true horror story from Sleeplis Whispers. Subscribe and stay close, because tomorrow night, I swear to God, it gets worse.